It's really ironic how 2019 worked out for the Miami Dolphins because the whole thought from the beginning of the season was this team's going to be really bad. It's clear that they might be the worst team in the league, and they're going to be certainly battling it out and tanking for Tua. Like, that was the mindset. That was the mantra. That was the goal. Tank for Tua. Tank for Tua. And, when you look at the way things were going down, you trade away Laramie Tunsil for future draft picks before the season even starts. Early on in the year, you trade away Minkah Fitzpatrick to the Steelers for a future first-round pick that you now realize. In the midseason, you trade away Kenyon Drake. Like, it was very clear and obvious this team was comfortable and okay with bottoming it out and trying to truly start over and build from the ground up under head coach Brian Flores. And then something funny happened along the way. This team that was looking historic levels of bad was looking like it could potentially be one of those 0-16 teams or at least a 1-15 team at the very best. After that 0-7 start, started winning some damn games, and total credit to the players that were left, total credit to the coaching staff, total credit to Brian Flores. The Dolphins didn't give up. They kept playing, they kept fighting, they kept competing. And they started to play much better football the second half of the season, going 5-4 in their last 9 games. Like, that type of performance almost makes you want to make Brian Flores the coach of the year last year. Like, that's how impressive that stuff was. And you say, well, 5-11 is nothing to brag about. Yeah, 5-11 is nothing to brag about for a team that was supposed to win no games or maybe 1 game, 2, if you want to get extremely generous and or lucky. They won 5. 5! Who saw that coming? And then when you talk about the Dolphins, it's funny and crazy how it all works out. They started winning too much to the point where some people were worried, well, it might be costing them the chance at Tua. And as we found out, ultimately, it did not. So winning 5 games ultimately equated to tanking for Tua because that's exactly what they got. Well, now you go into the offseason. It's clear the rebuild is underway. And the Dolphins had a bunch of money available under the cap. So they were going to go out and sign some guys. As you can't just rely solely on the draft to build your team, especially when you're in this bad of a situation, this defunct in terms of talent levels on your team. You have to go out there and spend some money in free agency. And so they did. Signed Byron Jones in free agency away from the Dallas Cowboys, adding him to that secondary that could potentially be really, really good down there at South Beach. Brought in Kyle Van Noy. Here's a guy that's familiar with the old kind of Patriots way, went to New England, kind of resurrected his career a little bit, frankly. So now he comes to play under somebody he's familiar with Flores. Certainly was a nice addition for the defense. Brought in other guys like Jordan Howard to be a cog in the wheel at running back for this team, perhaps serve a LeGarrette Blount type of role. Then bringing in other guys such as Emmanuel Ogbah and Shaq Lawson to provide some more depth and some more potential pass rush ability, give some more weapons and options there if you really want to classify them as weapons and options, but nonetheless, they at least tried to go out there and fill some of the holes in their roster by throwing some money at the problem because they had a lot of leaks that they had to plug, and they probably plugged a few of them here. But beyond question still, the most important thing for the Dolphins was going to be this draft. That 2020 draft is the moment in time that will be key for this organization for the next 8 to 10 years. Because if they hit it big in this draft, they're going to be positioned well in the future. If they didn't, it's going to start a very vicious potential cycle that will take a long time for them to climb out of. They ended up getting Tua at number 5. And look, I'll say this about Tua. He's got things about his game that you really, really like. The hip injury, I think, is a concern and a legitimate concern, and ultimately only time's going to bear out whether he's going to be able to make it to a second contract or be able to stay healthy for a long period of time. The track record with that type of injury, not the best, admittedly. But maybe they thought that the upside there was tremendous. Tua's got a certain level of instincts and feel for the game, kind of that intangible that, you can't always quantify that you want out of a quarterback, and I think that's great. There are certainly holes and flaws in his game that I saw on film. I had more of a 2nd to 3rd round grade on him. Now, to be fair, that was in part because of the hip injury and some other factors. Miami's got to hope that he's the guy. They've got to hope that he's the guy. If he is, things look very bright very quickly. If not, and especially if, let's say, Herbert or Jordan Love ends up being a guy long term, they're going to look really, really bad for a long, long time to come. Then they had 2 other first-round picks. They spent one on Austin Jackson. the offensive tackle from USC, plugging the hole in part left by Laramie Tunsil's departure via the trade. Again, not a huge fan of organizations that do this. You trade away an established player at this position to then immediately replace them with a first-round pick invested in that position. It'd be one thing if you drafted a kid in the third round and they ended up playing at a similar level to the guy that you got rid of or the guy that departed. That's different. Like you got to replace it at some point. But I'm just not a fan of that kind of cycle. I don't think that's how you build a great football team. Then they got the corner. I'm just going to call him Noah because these past couple of days I've been doing so many of these videos. I've been getting tongue-tied really quickly. I do apologize. But, again, you talk about another young defensive back in that secondary. Xavier Howard's not in trouble, and you bring in Byron Jones, and now you've got this Noah kid. You're talking about the makings of potentially a really good secondary. Guys like Robert Hunt and Raekwon Davis, Brandon Jones, Solomon Kinley. I think Kinley's going to be starting inside on that offensive line. They had a lot of picks. They had a lot of ammunition in this draft. They can connect on a few of these guys. It's certainly going to do well for them, bode well for them for the future, and probably, frankly, in 2020. And I think if you look at the Dolphins, there's certainly some reason for optimism. Anytime that you go into an offseason where you've clearly had the tank to some degree, and you got all this draft pick capital, there's that infusion of youth and fresh that just kind of revitalizes a city, an organization, and a fan base in a locker room a little bit. Eventually it's got to pan out, but it can revitalize and refresh. It can feel like there's a good payoff coming. And, if you're a Dolphins fan for the time being, until Tua time happens, you get some more Fitz magic. Hey, why not? And if Fitzpatrick plays well enough, Tua might not have to see the field in 2020. I find that unreasonable, unlikely, and actually borderline kind of stupid in today's NFL. Unless you are saying that you want to rest Tua for an entire year to really, truly make sure his hip is 100% solid and good to go, then that I get. But if he is cleared and he is healthy, and I believe that he is, he's even going to be active in week 1. If he's active, that should mean that he can play. And as soon as Fitzmagic starts struggling, as soon as there are any concerns, as soon as it is not clear that he's any better or close to better than Tua needs to play. I hate this whole mindset of logic of sitting guys and letting them watch and develop. The Chiefs did that, sure, a couple of years ago with Alex Smith and Patrick Mahomes, but you could also argue the Chiefs at that time, Alex Smith was solid enough where you could argue, at least initially in 2017 season, he might have been a better option for the team than Patrick Mahomes. They probably should have made the call later in the year to go to Mahomes and figure it out, but you really think that Mahomes is so much better because he got to sit and learn and watch for a year? The best way to learn is play. They got to play Tua at some point this year, unless they're strategically holding him out due to injury concerns. Jordan Howard and Matt Breida, who they acquired, should provide a nice improvement to that running game. It's not going to be perfect, but you've got some power, you've got some speed. It's going to be better than I think it was last year for sure. And that secondary, again, as I've referenced a couple times now, I think actually has the makings of potentially being a really, really good unit. Concerning things for me are the receiving core outside of Devontae Parker and maybe to a lesser degree Mike Gesicki. What are you going to get out of the other guys there? Do you have much talent there? That's a great question to me. The offensive line, how's that offensive line going to do? And especially when you're talking about protecting Tua, it's going to take on an even greater significance and importance because this is a guy in Tua that was used to having a great set of players around him in Alabama, which makes his evaluation for the NFL level a little bit more difficult. You're saying, well, he's got, if you say he's got great pocket presence, well, he's also behind that offensive line. What the hell does that tell you? It can be hard to determine that. It can be kind of hard to gauge that. And I look at the defense and I say, where is the pass rush going to come from? Now, certainly, you could say, well, you brought in Kyle Van Noy and Agba and Lawson, and some combination of those guys are going to improve the pass rush. Yeah, but you also lost Jordan Phillips in free agency. It's not like you were absolutely loaded there to begin with. So there are certainly some concerns. I think this will be an improved team in 2020. I liked what I saw out of this team the second half of the year in terms of how they seemed to buy into Brian Flores and that coaching staff and their philosophy. I expect this team to be better. Now, granted, you could get ants in your pants and say, well, we want to make the playoffs this year. We want to win this division without Tom Brady there in New England, and it is certainly understandable. But as much as you might like that to be the goal, the number one goal of the program to me is that if Tua is healthy, Tua needs to play sometime this year. And you need to figure out what he can do. You need to figure out quickly whether he can be that guy or not. That's what this season comes down to. I think the Dolphins will win something like 8 games. Like I expect them to be improved. I expect them to be competitive. I expect them to be tough. But they're realistically probably a year away from really worrying folks. Like they might concern some folks right now because they'll be well coached and they'll be tough and they'll play hard. And if you're not careful, they'll come up and jump and get you. But I really think they're a year away from starting to really be something to reckon with in that AFC East.